Welcome to Forest Drift, my channel for my passion of Japanese the car culture and all things Initial D. This is our first episode of our Initial D arcade stage build. Now we're going to focus on this build and restoration, and there's a few things to keep in mind with this build and restoration. So the first thing that we want to acknowledge is that this cabinet, you won't see it in its raw state. A lot of these parts, due to it having been moved around, they will have been already stripped from the cabinet and they will already have been shot blasted and powder coated. So some of the smaller parts we've still got in their raw form that we still have yet to restore, but a lot of the black main metal parts of this cabinet, they've already been prepped, they've already been painted, and they're ready to be rebolted to the cabinet. The second thing to take note is that we will be using the official manuals. So this is an American one, but we do have a UK spec for 1, 2 and 3. Now we will be following these manuals through the build, hoping to identify all the part numbers and if we're missing anything from our actual cabinet that should have originally been on this cabinet. We will also be highlighting differences in the manuals when we come across them, but we'll be using all different versions as a reference to what we're actually doing with the restoration. Also, we talked about the part numbers. We will be trying to give you all the part numbers that we can identify. However, some parts of the build don't have specific part numbers due to the fact they came as a complete component. Therefore, when we have find replacements, we will then try and give you a guide on finding your own replacements, or you can contact us about how to get hold of some replacements that we've been able to source. Also, some parts for Sega are no longer available. So we're doing this build initially as a complete new old stock, but we will have to restore some parts, and even some parts we will have to replace with an alternative. And finally, talking of replacing parts, etc., this cabinet we're going to build pretty much by the book. We're going to use all the official parts we can, and we will build it as the spec would have been as it rolled out from Sega UK. However, there are subtle changes that Sega did make with the cabinet in terms of when it progressed in the build. The biggest thing that you will have noticed is that some of the Sega cabinets that came out later had sound amps in them, and like a sub underneath the seat and gull wing speakers. These weren't originally part of stock coming from an Initial D cabinet, but with the prestige of Initial D and with the heritage of the music from Super Eurobeat, that plays a huge part of the Initial D culture. So we felt that that is an upgrade that we want to put into this cabinet. So we appreciate it didn't come out of the book, but we will be looking to add this as an add-on. We will also look at other changes that we feel that Sega did that we can put into this cabinet, because we feel they keep the preservation of the cabinet and the historic point of doing this. Now, some of the things could be additional fans. We're trying to keep the cabinet running as long as possible, so we will try to keep things so they don't break as soon as we've built it by using older parts. We want to keep them going as long as possible. Fear not, we will not be doing the LCD conversion that some of these cabinets have had done to them, especially Outrun 2 cabinets. And we will also not be replacing the original hardware, the Naomi boards, with a PC or MAME or anything like that. So the changes we are going to make, or deviations from the book, will be changes that Sega have actually made and that we feel will add to this cabinet and take nothing actually away from the original cabinet. So let's get into our build. First part, as with most things when you build, you start from the bottom and go up. We're doing exactly the same. We have here the assembly sub main base. Now, in the manual, this lists 6 parts. Also, the manual in the illustration shows the keyhole on the side. Now, that is from a Japanese cabinet, so therefore the English one won't have that. So if your cabinet has that, then you have a Japanese cabinet. But for ours, it's correct spec to what we're looking for, and that's what we are. So the first part in the list is the main base. Ours has already been stripped and coated, so we'll have to show pictures on retrospect to this. The cabinet itself was in a pretty good condition. There was no real dents or dings into it, so we had a good base to work from. However, like most of these cabinets, they suffer from the paint flaking off, the original paint flaking off. Now we hear stories and myths of what this actually came about. The story goes is that originally Sega UK, which was based in Cardiff, I believe, they received these as metal shells. They then found a colour that matched from a spray can, popped down to Halfords when they ran out of paint, got some more spray cans. The metal wasn't primed. The paint then was applied directly to the raw metal. Over time, this metal adhesive, the adhesive of the paint would flake off. Therefore, it would expose to bare metal. Bare metal would then rust, and therefore it would start bubbling and more would flake off. So that is the sort of main problem you're going to deal with a base of a cabinet, and most of the metal parts of this cabinet. So we looked at how best we can restore this. We obviously want to future-proof it so this doesn't happen again. So the initial idea was to strip the cabinet and then prime it with cans and then respray it. It was black, also a semi-gloss. We sort of spoke to a few people with cabinets, worked out it would be a semi-gloss rather than a gloss. We then looked to how best to do this. Now, I'm not great at spray painting. It's never been a thing of mine. It's not my trade or anything to do with part of my trade. Also, therefore, it takes a lot of room, a lot of space, and you have to buy a lot of additional stuff. You have to prep. If you're going to spray, what's the best way of spraying? Is it using spray cans? Is it using a compressor with an air gun? All costs of time, of money, and mistakes. And that was probably the scariest thing, is doing it wrong and then stripping it, redoing it again, doing it wrong. Weather. Obviously with spraying, I'm no professional by no means, but I've been told that spraying when it's damp or raining is not the best idea. And if you live in the UK, then finding a nice sunny day in the UK to spray is very limited. So we looked at those options. It then came to us that we're not going to be able to do this ourselves. We need to go to a professional to get this done. So we rang around a few places. Obviously, the most comparable thing to what we're trying to do would be a body repair shop or a car repair shop. The costs of those quotes were coming in and they were high. I knew they would be expensive because obviously the application, the time, the skill, the trade that you're paying for. So we were kind of on the fence then of where do we go from this? We always knew the cabinet would cost more than it initially cost to buy, and also what it would cost after it's complete would be still cost more than the sale value. That wasn't necessarily an issue. It was just we didn't want to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and only have one part actually done. So we spoke to a few other people in the arcade world to sort of how best to preserve this, because that was the other thing, was we wanted to get it done, but we didn't want to have to do it again. And if the cabinet ever moved on, I wanted it to look as fresh and clean as it would now. So after speaking to people, shot blasting seemed to be the way to go. So I spoke to a guy locally to me who'd had some cabinets done, and he put me on to a shot blaster. Now, shot blasting is a very expensive thing. Also, a lot of shot blasting companies won't actually do it for the public. They tend to operate with businesses. Therefore, there's normally a minimum charge. So therefore, you kind of have to bundle things up. And obviously, they're looking at getting this work for a long time, whereas you're just wanting one or two parts done every so often. So getting a shot blaster that will do this is very difficult. But this guy that we spoke to, he was very happy to help. He'd done parts for cabinets before. He knew how OCD we are on having cabinets done correctly, to write color codes and stuff like that. He also realized that they were a bit more valuable than just some of the metal sort of garden gates that he would have in. So he knew that we wanted him to have some sort of care taken with. Great guy. We also were able to do a deal with him where we paid cash, so therefore we didn't have to go through VAT being added onto it. We were also then able to give him these parts, and he would do them in his spare time or over the weekend, which, as he was helping me out in terms of doing them for me, whereas a lot of other shot blasting companies had rejected the work. I didn't really worry about the time. He was helping me, so as long as he got it done, I didn't worry too much about how long it took him to have this work done. So it worked out good for me that way. He was able to get the cabinet. There was a bit of preparation work beforehand. In terms of that, we stripped the whole cabinet. We took off all the metal parts that bolted onto it. We removed the stickers that we could to try and save them. The stickers will go on in another video, we'll talk about that. And then we removed the casters, leg levelers, and what we did is, as the guy was kind of trying to do it as a favour to us in a way we thought we'd help him out. So the more or less work he had to do to get this done for me, the better. So we did put plastic bolts into all the bolt holes in order that we wouldn't have to dye them, tap and dye them out at the end of the job. So we prepped it all that way, took it down the road to him, and then about a week or so later, we got the cabinet base back. So initially we had some photos sent over. Cabinet looked great. It just made it pop and made it know that we made the right choice in this. When the cabinet returned, we removed all the plastic bolts. We then tap and dyed all the other small holes that's in there, which tend to be M3s, M4s. I think there's an M6 holes as well in there. And then once we'd done that, we had a great working base to start from. As we're talking about the bases, we're just some bits to highlight. We said we'd show variations and things. Now, if you're looking at your cabinet and you want to know if it's an original Initial D base, the easiest way to tell is at the front and at the rear of the sides. You'll see some vents. Now, on an Initial D cabinet, the vents, there's 2 columns. On a different spec model like a Daytona 2, it's a single vent. It's still the same overall width as the twin, but it is a single column, whereas an Initial D has 2 columns. So that's one way. An Outrun 2 is also 2 columns, I believe, as well. But just if you're looking at purchasing one and you want to know if it's an original or a conversion, then that's a good telltale sign to see where yours is. And just along that sort of vein, if you are looking at buying one, it's going to sound more like a tire kicker buying a car type phrase now. Check the leg levelers. When they get moved, they don't get always wound right up. So therefore, when they get bumped up steps and bumped at ramps and into vehicles, they too tend to get bent backwards. This will then stop the leg leveler coming straight the way down, giving stability to the cabinet, especially if it's a single cabinet when you've got it mounted and you're wanting to use it. So that is one thing to check just if you're going to buy a cabinet. Now let's move on to the next part. The next part on our list is a caster. Now these are pretty good condition. They were a bit, obviously, they're on the floor, they're always going to be dirty. You can see from the white vinyl, the white nylon, that they got scuffs, they got scratches. They're going to be like this. They're not designed to be run on carpet. So we had 4 of these and they looked good condition. But we had this nice new shiny base now, so we wanted to kind of up the stakes in what we were doing. So we had a look to see where we could get these from. The first thing we did was look for a maker's mark. We reasoned that if Sega had all the parts imported in, there might be some common parts that they wouldn't need to have had imported in. And we were right. You can't really see on this, for the camera probably not pick this up, but there is a maker's mark, and the maker's mark on it does say England. So we knew then that these must have been sourced kind of locally to where the cabinet was built. Obviously we faced this problem then of will they be sold to the public? Obviously businesses buying hundreds of these and me just wanting 4 for my cabinet. We were able to put the manufacturer into a search engine and we found the manufacturer. We dropped them an email, explained to them we're storing a cabinet, we need 4 of these, we believe these are the originals, would have come from them. We gave them photos with dimensions of where the bolt holes were, what size the Sega manual explains them as. I think it's 63 millimeters, it will say on the screen. And we sort of went down that approach with them, explained that we'd only want 4, we won't have a business account or anything like that, we just have to pay by card. Is that something they could do? So I left it with them, and credit to them, they came back within a day or so, said to me, yeah, we've got the parts, we've not changed them in 30 plus years we've been making them, they're exactly the same. The bolt holes are right, the size of the wheel, the weight, everything is what you want. Gave me the price. Postage was high, but then they're used to selling. This isn't an eBay shop, this is a business, so they're used to selling to other businesses. So postage is normally going to be next day delivery and a courier service, and businesses don't really worry about that. Whereas it almost worked out, I think, about the same price as what the casters cost me. But 4 brand new casters, and as you can see, exactly the same. They came out and they haven't changed, the same stamps, everything on them. So that really was a great win. We were able to source them locally. We know where we can get some from in the future if we ever want them. Okay, so since we had the casters, the next way to attach them was through the manual. The parts list said we needed some M8 by 16 bolts and some spring washers. Now, if you're familiar with boat terminology, you know that on these boats you'll have a maker's mark, manufacturer's mark, and also the strength or the material type. So these are 8.8. Now, there's nothing wrong with these bolts. They would have been put on when the cabinet was originally put together. The only reason to take them off is if you were replacing a caster. So I don't think that would have happened, or very rarely would have happened. So they're probably the original ones. Problem was, they weren't as shiny as I wanted. Everything else was nice, new and clean. So why not have new ones of these? So we were able to get some replacement ones. They're not the same maker's mark, manufacturer's mark. To find that, I think would have been impossible. But as long as they're 8.8 and the right sizes, we were able to get brand new ones for our cabinet. So we then were able to put these now onto our base and then move on to the next part. So the next part is listed twice in the parts list. So there's 2 versions, one which has lock nuts, 3 lock nuts, and the other has a single lock nut. This was changed in later manuals. So we're going to put the 3 on and the 1 as per the original Initial D 1 stage manual. Now, these are the hardest parts, I think, that we first come across, due to the fact that they're now no longer available from Sega, so we can't buy these parts. So we're going to have to look at restoring them. People have found replacements, but they're not identical to how Sega's original ones are. As you can see, this is what the original one looks like. Sega have a few variations of these due to the fact that if you've got a Sega Naomi, you'll notice they're different. So finding some the same as what was on the cabinet can be tricky if you are missing them. Also, another point to note is that 9 times out of 10, the actual cup part on the end of the foot is missing. Now, as we've mentioned before, when the cabinets get moved around, they don't always get the leg levelers raised to the top, so they get hit. And when they get hit, they break the foot off. This is only held on with a circlip. So once that pops, the foot falls off. If people aren't really paying attention, and most people, apart from collectors, won't be, then that part goes missing, the leg's still on there, sometimes bent as well, so therefore it's nothing to them. But as a collector, you want to have all the parts. So finding the part was going to be hard. Also, this part is not one listed as individual parts. This is in the manual, you can see that it's listed as a complete unit. However, this is made up of different parts. Upon taking it apart, we were able to determine what it is actually made up of. So you have the circlip in the bottom, then you have the actual foot, then you have a plastic shim. Now, this was a part that wasn't on all the leg levelers we had. So we had to find replacements for these due to the fact there is no part number in the Sega manual. Then you have obviously the leg leveler itself, and then you have the lock nuts, and depending if you're putting them on the front or the back is 1 or 3. So when it came to looking at our 4, we actually were missing one of them. It looked like ours had been hit in moving, and it looked like the foot had popped off and we'd lost one of the cups. So we went to a UK forum for arcade collectors, and we were able to put a wanted post, and we actually were able to find somebody with one of the ones we wanted. We had a few people respond, but unfortunately they were the wrong size, or they were different cups or foot. So there are some variations, so be very careful when you are buying yours that you are getting the exact one that you're after. So we then got hold of this. As you can see, we got these, they were all in various types of condition. These are the parts that are right at the bottom of the cabinet, so obviously they are the dirtiest parts. Now we had to come up with a way of cleaning these and restoring these due to the fact that they were no longer available from Sega. So we spoke to a few different people. We asked how the best way of cleaning these parts would be, as we're no expert on this kind of thing. We spoke to a few people and they said to us that a good way of cleaning nuts and bolts is to soak them in vinegar. So we popped to our local supermarket, we picked up some bottles of vinegar, which is about 40p a bottle. We then put them in a jar and we left them to soak in the vinegar. We did one at first just to see how this would turn out, because obviously if it had ruined the part, we didn't want to then ruin the rest of the ones we had. So we had some spare bits, so we put them in to see how this works out. You leave them in the jar for around a couple of days. Every time you walk past, just shake the jar, you'll see the bubbles in there, and obviously it's doing its work of cleaning the extra parts. We took these out after a few days, we gave them a clean. We then used a rotary tool with a wire brush on, and we were able to clean them up. And as you can see, they came out pretty well. So now we had all the parts together, it was time now to put them all back as one assembly. The lock nuts we had some original lock nuts on them, some had them on. They were quite seized because obviously they haven't been used or anything for years. Since we had cleaned up the actual boat itself, it made sense to get new lock nuts. So we were able to replace these with shiny new lock nuts. The next part we had was this shim. Now, as we talked about, the shim itself we didn't actually have on all four of them, so we couldn't reuse the originals. And we've got the original one of them here, and as you can see, they are pretty thin. So therefore, finding replacements we thought would be quite easy. It turns out finding replacement shims are not easy. They work out at around 27 overall diameter with about a 12 mil diameter in the middle, and as you can see, they're pretty thin, so they're sort of 0.1 mil. So we had a look on eBay and Google, and we just unable to find the exact same thing. What we were able to find were their replacement. Now I will try and get this so you can see as best you can. The replacement itself, if you can see that and it's focusing, it's slightly more. It's about 28.5 mil, I think, in terms of its overall diameter. Its internal diameter of the hole is still 12 mil, which is spot on. And in terms of thickness, it's pretty close. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but it's not that far off. The reason for these shims, now I don't know if these shims had this, they were on the original cabinets and then taken off for future builds. I don't know if they were then not on the original and put onto future builds. However, the legs levelers we had, some had them on and some hadn't, and it's not a part that would have fallen off per se because some had the feet still on. Now the reason for these are, if you do not have the leg leveler in, they will ring like a bell. So if you're moving your cabinets around and you notice there is a ring, that's because you're missing a shim, and yours doesn't have the shim. So as I said, we were able to find some shims, put them on. They don't rattle no more, and then we were able to put the foot on. Following that, there is a circlip, and that's about a 12 mil circlip. So those we replaced as well. As we were doing the complete build, it seemed that the tension that a circlip gets put under, having a 30-year-old circlip on there, it might pop off, the foot might drop, and we might end up losing it. So we replaced those as well, and we completed that build. We were then able to then screw them in to the feet of the base of the actual cabinet. Okay, and that is our sub-assembly main base complete. We won't actually be putting the stickers on. They're not actually on the part list. We will be doing that later, and we've got to decide what we're going to do with the stickers. We've got a few options. Which cabinet do we sticker it up as? Do we do it as initially 1, 2 or 3? Also, do we use reproduction stickers, or do we keep original stickers, which we do have if we choose that route. So that's all the parts on the list completed. So the next video, we're going to look at the AC assembly power. This was a slave cabinet, so the power situation is slightly different, and we've got to convert it to a single player cabinet. I'm sure that's going to bring us some issues, but that's what we're doing the video for, so we can work out with you guys and the community how we can get over these problems. So thank you for watching our video. If you've enjoyed the first part of our Initial D cabinet build, then hit the like button. That will help us. If you've got any comments and you want to know any information about this part of the build, anything we're going to do in the future, or if you can get hold of some parts or you need parts for your cabinet, then comment below and we're happy to respond to those comments. And finally, if you want to be kept up to date with the rest of this installment and other parts of our Initial D collection, then hit that subscribe button. All of this will help the channel grow and hopefully will make it a success for us and for you in building your own cabinet. So thanks for watching once again, and don't forget, stay sideways.